Hi, I'm Matthew Lapp, host of Matthew Lapp Train Guide. Also, today I am at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania. The Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania is located on 300 Gap Road in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, and is open if you check the web for the hours. The museum is just across the street from the Strasburg Railroad, the oldest working tourist railroad in America. The museum all began in 1957 and had been an operating turntable from the Reading Railroad. The interior of the exhibit hall is what looks like a recreation of a huge Pennsylvania Railroad style station, the way it was from when the railroad still existed. It also doubled the size of the indoor display. It is administered by the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commonwealth with the active support of the Friends of the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania. The museum was created to provide a historical account of the railroading in Pennsylvania by preserving rolling stock, artifacts, and archives of the railroad companies of the Commonwealth. However, the museum had branched out over the years, acquiring some pieces that are not directly related to Pennsylvania but are important to the history of railroading. The original building was roughly 45,000 square feet in size and included an observation bridge leading across Rolling Stock Hall, allowing visitors to see the trains from above. Then in 1955, the building was expanded to 100,000 square feet. At the 1939 to 1940 New York World's Fair, the Pennsylvania Railroad displayed a number of historic locomotives and cars they had collected over the years. After the fair had ended, the railroad decided to preserve the equipment that was displayed along with various other locomotives and rolling stock. The equipment was stored away in a roundhouse in Northumberland, Pennsylvania, and looked after by employees. Then, with the Railroad Museum and the railroad successor, the Penn Central looking to rid itself of the collection in the late 1960s, it was decided the museum was to be built. Directly next to the Strasburg Railroad in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, the engines were moved to the Strasburg Railroad, where they were stored while the museum was under construction. A large number of Pennsylvania Railroad's historic collection was sent to Strasburg, coupled together. Then in 1975, the museum opened its doors to the public. Also in 2007, the entrance of the building was redesigned and the current looks like almost like what you'd expect to see what an old style movie theater entrance looks like. Also, the gift shop was also renovated as well. Also in the museum building features an HO model railroad display, which is modeled that takes place between Altoona and Harrisburg during the steam and diesel transition era. In 2018, a roundhouse was planned to be constructed near the turntable, and groundbreaking started in 2019. Today, the museum still continues to preserve historic railroad equipment as well. Okay, I'm going to show you the railroad logos they have on the tiles, and I'll get behind the camera and show you around. So here we go. Okay, so as we begin here, you can see between these rugs, I can't move the rugs, I need to leave them. But you can see this says Norfolk Southern right here. And under that rug, Baltimore and Ohio, Central Railroad of New Jersey, Delaware and Hudson, Maryland and Pennsylvania, New York Central. Wonder what's under this rug. Could try to, Lehigh, LNHR, but I can't. And I think that stands for, this is New York Central. I'm trying to figure it out. Conrail, CSX, Bessemer and Lake Erie, Pennsylvania Railroad, Reading, Western Maryland, East Broad Top, Penn Central, Erie, Lackawanna Railroad, the Delaware, Lackawanna and Western, the Monongahela Railway, Amtrak, Nickel Plate Road, Lehigh Valley, New England, and Erie. And these are all railroads that served Pennsylvania over the years. Yeah. What you see right behind me is Cumberland Valley B. Cumberland Valley B was built by the Cumberland Valley Railroad Shops in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania in 1855 and is a baggage coach car. It has one section for passengers and the other section is for baggage. It has an unusual walkway along the baggage compartment and a feature that may have been added to it after the war. It also contains a baggage room window along the gallery. This car traveled on passenger trains for many years as well. Then in 1909 it was retired. It was then acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, and it was carefully restored inside and out and was put on display. Today it is preserved here at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen on display today. What you see right behind me is Philadelphia and Reading 1. Reading 1 was built by Braithwaite, Milner and Company in London, England in 1838 and is an 022 type steam locomotive. Also, the locomotive is named Rocket. When it was finished being built, it was shipped to the country and was taken to Reading, Pennsylvania by a canal boat. This locomotive was the first of 8 English-made locomotives purchased by the Philadelphia and Reading Railway till 1941. It served the Reading to Pottstown part of the railroad till 1879, and it was then retired. It was then taken out of retirement in 1893 for the Chicago World's Columbian Exposition and was shown at the St. Louis Exposition in 1904. It then attended the Fair of the Iron Horse in 1927. Then it was on display at the Reading Terminal in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. In 1933, it was loaned to the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania from the Reading Railroad and sat in the train gallery of the museum. The Conrail, which the Reading Railroad merged to in 1976, identified the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania as the new home of the locomotive. In 2023, it was then acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, as it would honor to place amid the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's premier railroad heritage collection. It was then moved to the site and was put on display in the rolling stock gallery. Today, it is seen here on display at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is today. As well as that, it is the oldest steam locomotive in the collection as well. What you see right behind me is Reading 1251. Reading 1251 was built by the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad Reading Shops in Reading, Pennsylvania in 1918 and is the 2306 steam locomotive built by that factory and is an 060T tank engine six-wheeler type steam locomotive and is a B4A class steam locomotive. The locomotive was originally built as an I2A class steam locomotive with a wheel arrangement as a 280 consolidation type steam locomotive, and it was built as a camelback by the Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in an unknown year, but was built between 1888 and 1890 for the Central Railroad of New Jersey Railroad with an unknown number.
In 1918, after World War II, it was rebuilt by the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad shops in Reading, Pennsylvania to its present wheel arrangement, design, and locomotive classification to how it looks today, with the back two wheels and lead wheels being removed from the locomotive as it was rebuilt into a tank engine. Originally, it was used by the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad, since being rebuilt to how it is today, and this is the number it had. In 1923, the railroad merged to the Reading Railroad and it kept the number. For many years, it was used as a roundhouse goat and worked inside the Reading Roundhouse. It was then retired in 1964 and it was the only steam locomotive of its kind in use on a Class I railroad in the country. Then it was bought by George Hart for Rail Tours Inc. and operated for the Pennsylvania and Maryland Heritage Railroad in York, Pennsylvania. It was paired with a tender from a Reading Railroad locomotive. Then in 1966, it was retired once again. In 1968, it was moved to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania. Then the museum purchased the locomotive in 1972 and was cosmetically restored in 1982. Then it went on display. Today it is preserved here at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is preserved today. What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Power and Light Company 4094. Pennsylvania Power and Light 4094 was built by Heisler Locomotive Works in Erie, Pennsylvania in 1940 and is the 47th steam locomotive built by that factory and is an 080F fireless 8-wheeler type steam locomotive and is an 8-30 class steam locomotive. It is a fireless steam locomotive and fireless steam engines were used in areas that have flammable substances such as textile mills, chemical plants, and coal burning plants, and they operated without the need of a fire to heat the boiler water to make steam, and they used heavily insulated boilers to store pressurized steam and hot water. Before it started work, it was originally displayed at the New York World's Fair in 1940. Also, it was streamlined for its appearance there. It was the largest fireless locomotive ever built. Shortly after the fair, it was sold to the Hammermill Paper Company in Erie, Pennsylvania, and was numbered 4. Then it was proved to be too heavy for the tracks at the mill. Then, in 1941, it was sold to the Pennsylvania Power and Light Company in Houghton, Pennsylvania, and was renumbered 4094. It was soon liveried with black and gold. For many years, it was used to switch hopper cars loaded with coal. In 1969, it was retired and was then acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania. During its restoration, it was uncovered by the museum to its original sky blue livery it used at the Pennsylvania Power and Light Company. Today, it is the only 080 fireless steam locomotive, and it is the largest of its kind to ever be built, and today it is preserved here at the museum where it is seen today.
What you see right behind me is Bethlehem Steel Company 111.
Bethlehem Steel Company 111 was built by Erie Iron Works in Erie, Pennsylvania in 1941 and is an 040F four-wheeler type steam locomotive and is a 419 class steam locomotive. This locomotive spent many years at the Bethlehem Steel Company in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and was used to switch cars for many years. It was built for the National Malleable and Steel Casting Company and was used to switch cars around the facility in Chicago, Illinois. This locomotive was built as a fireless steam locomotive, and fireless steam engines were used in areas that have flammable substances such as textile mills, chemical plants, and coal burning plants, and they operated without the need of a fire to heat the boiler water to make steam, and they used heavily insulated boilers to store pressurized steam and hot water. In 1972, the locomotive was donated to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, and it was used as an emergency backup locomotive at the steelworks. It was then moved to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania. It was painted black till 2014. It was moved into the restoration shop. It was being cosmetically restored till the project was complete in 2021. The locomotive was repainted orange and was put back on display. Today it is preserved here at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it can be seen on display today. What you see right behind me is the John Stevens cog. This replica of the John Stevens cog was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Altoona shops in 1939 and is a cog steam locomotive. This is the second replica to be built. The original one was built by a colonel and engineer and inventor named John Stevens in 1825. The locomotive uses a primitive design derived from contemporary marine practice and was described in period sources as a steam wagon. The boiler is mounted at one end. The marine-style vertical multi-tube boiler is 45.5 inches tall. Reports indicate that original boiler was of the water tube type and was designed by John Stevens for steamboat operation. The replica is made from iron with iron tubes. The locomotive features spoked wheels. Significantly, the running wheels are flangeless, instead using vertically orient roller guides at the back of the wheels to engage the inside face of running rails. When the first U.S. railroad charter was granted in 1815 to John and others for the New Jersey Railroad, he built the original steam carriage in 1825 and ran it on his estate in Hoboken, New Jersey, with several passenger cars at 12 miles per hour. The original may have been cut up years ago. Then this one was built 104 years later. This replica, however, was only shown at the 1939 to 1940 New York World's Fair. Then the Penn Central donated it to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania in 1979. It was outside on display originally. Then it was moved inside the building. Also, it is one of two replicas of its type that were built of the original, and the other one can be found on display at the Samuel C. Williams Library at Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, New Jersey. And this one can be seen on display at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is today.
What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 7002.
Pennsylvania Railroad 7002 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Altoona Shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 1902 and is the 929th steam locomotive built by that factory and is a 442 Atlantic type steam locomotive and is an E7 class steam locomotive. Originally, it was numbered 8063 and it was originally an E2 class. This locomotive spent many years on the Pennsylvania Railroad, hauling passengers on the Pennsylvania Railroad. In 1916, it was rebuilt as an E7 class. In 1949, it was renumbered 7002. This isn't the original 7002 because the original was scrapped in the year 1934 and was originally built in 1902. It was said to have reportedly reached a speed record of 127.1 miles per hour on June 12, 1905. The record was set by the original between AY Tower and Elida, Ohio, on its inaugural New York to Chicago run, hauling the Broadway Limited. It also would have been the fastest steam locomotive in the world. The Pennsylvania Railroad accidentally scrapped the original and felt terrible for their decision of disposing it. They used a similar locomotive, which is this, and gave it the number of 7002. It was then used for marketing purposes and appeared at the 1939 New York World's Fair and the 1948 Chicago Railroad Fair. Then it was added to the historic collection in Northumberland, Pennsylvania. Then in 1969, it was on loan to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, and then 10 years later, it was donated to the museum. Then, starting in 1983, it was leased to the Strasburg Railroad, where it operated with Pennsylvania Railroad 440-1223. Both locomotives were then put back on display at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania. Also, Pennsylvania Railroad 7002 is one of two surviving Pennsylvania Railroad 442s left in the world today, and 460 is the other one, and both the 460 and 7002 are seen here on display at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where they are preserved today.
What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 4639.
Pennsylvania Railroad 4639 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Juniata Shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 1895 and is a combined baggage and passenger car. This car spent many years being used on the Pennsylvania Railroad and it was used to carry passengers on board and baggage as well. One compartment is where baggage would be put and the other compartment would be where the passengers would be. It also rolled on passenger trains for a number of years. There were also times it would carry mail as well. In some cases, the car was put at the end of mixed freight and passenger trains and used to carry passengers in addition to the rear-end train crew. The car even hauled mail as well at certain times and had pigeonholes for small express packages. It was also a common feature on the Pennsylvania's passenger trains, from the luxurious Pennsylvania Special to the tiniest of locals. In 1939, the car was then retired from service and later it was then acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is preserved today.
What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 94.
Pennsylvania Railroad 94 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Juniata shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 1917, and is the 3191st steam locomotive built by that factory, and is an 040 four-wheeler type steam locomotive, and is an A5S class steam locomotive. This locomotive spent many years switching freight cars around in a Pennsylvania Railroad rail yard. In 1956, it was then retired and was loaned to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania by the Penn Central in 1969. Then, in 1979, it was then donated to the museum where it is today. Also, Pennsylvania Railroad 94 is the only remaining Pennsylvania Railroad 040 left in the world today, and is seen here on display at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is today.
What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 5741.
Pennsylvania Railroad 5741 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Juniata shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 1924, and is the 3966th steam locomotive built by that factory, and is a 460 10-wheeler type steam locomotive, and is a G5S class steam locomotive. It was the most powerful 10-wheeler produced in the U.S. and became the standard Pennsylvania Railroad commuter locomotive. It was used to haul commuter trains on the railroad for several years and operated in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Chicago, Illinois, Grand Rapids, Michigan, and Long Island, New York. In 1955, the locomotive was then retired, and it was then added to the historic collection in Northumberland, Pennsylvania. Then, in 1969, it was on loan to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, and then 10 years later, it was donated to the museum. Also, Pennsylvania Railroad 5741 is the only remaining 460 from the Pennsylvania Railroad, and 5741 is preserved here at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen today.
What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 1223.
Pennsylvania Railroad 1223 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Juniata shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 1905, and is the 1399th steam locomotive built by that factory, and is a 440 American type steam locomotive, and is a D16 SB class steam locomotive. For many years, this locomotive was used to pull passenger trains on the railroad. It pulled passenger trains in Maryland, Delaware, and New Jersey, and even Pennsylvania. It was one of the most modern American-style steam locomotives that were built. It appeared in the 1941 film Broadway Limited. In 1950, it was then retired and was then put on display at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania. In 1960, it was being restored to operation, and in 1965, it was put on lease to the Strasburg Railroad, which is next door to the museum just across the street. It then appeared in its second movie and appeared in the film Hello, Dolly, and was redone to match the movie aspect. It also appeared in several TV documentaries and commercials as well. It operated on the Strasburg Railroad with Pennsylvania Railroad 442 7002. Then both locomotives were then put back on display at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania. In 1989, it was put back into retirement and went back on display at the museum. Today, Pennsylvania Railroad 1223 is the last remaining 440 from the Pennsylvania Railroad, and it can be seen here on display at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen today.
What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 6.
Pennsylvania Railroad 6 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Juniata shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 1882 and is a baggage car. This car was used for several years to carry baggage on board whenever it was rolling down the tracks, whenever it was coupled with passenger train cars on the railroad. In 1909, it was retired and was off of its trucks, and it was used as a storage shed and yard office in Wilmington, Delaware. Then it was soon restored, and it then made an appearance at the 1940 New York World's Fair. Later on, it was then acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen on display today.
What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 6076.
Pennsylvania Railroad 6076 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad shops in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1899 and is a baggage car. This car was used for many years to carry passengers' baggage on board as well while it was used on the Pennsylvania Railroad. Then this car was leased to the Adams Express Company, which is a forerunner of the Railway Express Agency. Then, sometime after 1919, it was put into maintenance of way service and was a tool car. In 1939, it was retired from service. and later it was acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen today.
What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 8177.
Pennsylvania Railroad 8177 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Shops in Columbus, Ohio in 1896 and is a passenger coach. For many years, this car was used on passenger trains on the Pennsylvania Railroad and also would be used for carrying passengers on board as well. Then, sometime in the 1910s, it was put into maintenance of way use. In 1939, it was then retired from service and was then stored in the railroad's Northumberland, Pennsylvania engine house. In 1962, it was then moved to the Strasburg Railroad in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, and was restored and was repainted and was added with narrow vestibules. It was on lease to the Strasburg Railroad till 1968, and it was retired in the late 1960s, as it looks like. Then, in 1979, the car was then acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania. It was then used for special service on the Strasburg Railroad in 1982 and 1987. In 1987, it was part of the 75th anniversary of the Pennsylvania Railroad's Broadway Limited passenger train. Then it was put back on display afterwards. Today it can be seen here at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is preserved today.
What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 3556.
Pennsylvania Railroad 3556 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Juniata Shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 1886 and is a passenger coach. For many years, this car was used on passenger trains on the Pennsylvania Railroad and also would be used for carrying passengers on board as well. It also saw service on the Pennsylvania Railroad special passenger train. Then, in 1915, it was retired. Later, it was then acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen on display today.
What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 460.
Pennsylvania Railroad 460 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Juniata Shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 1914 and is the 2860th steam locomotive built by that factory and is a 442 Atlantic type steam locomotive and is an E6S class steam locomotive. This locomotive spent many years hauling passenger trains over the system. When Charles Lindbergh returned to the country after his historic flight, he was honored at his welcome home party by the 30th President of the country, Calvin Coolidge, in Washington, D.C. in 1927. Many news companies filmed the event and sent their films out of Washington, D.C. to New York City by airplane, but then the International News Corp sent their film by train and was pulled by this locomotive. It pulled a short train and raced toward New York City at a top speed of 115 miles per hour to steal an advantage over their competitors who flew their film to New York for processing. International leased a B-60 baggage car from the Pennsylvania Railroad and converted it to a laboratory where the film was developed, edited, and copied en route. Even at that speed, the train was beaten by airplane. It pulled the train on the Northeast Corridor from Washington, D.C. to Harrison, New York, and an electric locomotive took over for the remainder of the journey to New York City. The film on board the locomotive's train was the first to be shown at the theaters in New York City when it arrived. It was nicknamed the Lindbergh engine after the famous Lindbergh Run. In 1956, it was then retired and was added to the Pennsylvania's collection of historic locomotives in Northumberland, Pennsylvania. Then in 1969 it was moved to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania. In 1982 it went under cosmetic restoration till 1984. Then again from 2010 till 2016. It was repainted and refurbished and soon the project was completed and it went back on display. Also, Pennsylvania Railroad 460 is one of two surviving Pennsylvania Railroad 442s left in the world today, and 7002 is the other one, and both the 460 and 7002 are seen here on display at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where they are preserved today.
What you see right behind me is Reading 800.
Reading 800 was built by the Harlan and Hollingsworth Car Company in Wilmington, Delaware in 1931 and is an EMU passenger coach. This car was used for many years to haul passengers from station to station on the Reading Railroad. It spent several years hauling people around in the Philadelphia area. Then, in 1970, it was retired from service and was then acquired by the Philadelphia chapter of the National Railway Historical Society in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Then, in 1980, it was then acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen on display today. Also, you can even visit the interior of the car as well, but that only depends on whatever volunteers are available to open it as well.
What you see right behind me is Huntington and Broadtop 16.
Huntington and Broadtop Mountain 16 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Juniata Shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 1913 and is a four-wheeled bobber caboose. Originally, this car was built for the Pennsylvania Railroad and was originally numbered 478-396. It was used as the train crew's office years ago as well. In 1940, it was sold to the Huntington and Broadtop Mountain Railroad, where it was renumbered 16. Then, in 1954, it was retired and was acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen today.
What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 49398.
Pennsylvania Railroad 490,398 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Juniata Shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 1891 and is a scale test car. It was used for checking accuracy of track scales used to weigh loaded freight cars for the railroad. It also weighs 30,000 pounds. Then, when the Pennsylvania Railroad and New York Central Railroad merged to form the Penn Central Railroad in 1968, it was likely used by that railroad. Then, in 1976, the railroad merged to Conrail and it was likely used by that railroad. Then, in 1989, it was retired and was then acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania. It was carefully restored to how it looked at the Pennsylvania Railroad and is seen here on display at the museum where it is today.
What you see right behind me is Pittsburgh, Youngstown, and Ashtabula 1818.
Pittsburgh, Youngstown, and Ashtabula 1818 was built by the Barney and Smith Car Company in Dayton, Ohio in 1895 and is a gondola car. This car hauled coal for several years and found itself on freight trains many years ago. That railroad also connected the steel mills of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania with the shores of Lake Erie. Later, the railroad merged to the Pennsylvania Railroad and it was used by that railroad and it was renumbered 49175. Later, it was put into maintenance of way service and was an ash car. In 1939, it was retired and then it was exhibited at the New York World's Fair in 1939-1940, and it was restored by the Pennsylvania Railroad Juniata Shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania. Then, in 1979, it was donated to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen on display today. Also, it is the oldest surviving freight car from the Pennsylvania Railroad as well.
What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 1187.
Pennsylvania Railroad 1187 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Juniata Shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 1888 and is the 1235th steam locomotive built by that factory and is a 280 consolidation type steam locomotive and is an H3 class steam locomotive. It was originally a Class R locomotive. For many years, it was used to pull mainline freight. It was the first locomotive to introduce Belpaire firebox as it was named for the inventor Alfred Belpaire, and the firebox was designed that provided greater strength than previous designs and allowed more space for steam as well as more areas for combustion. In 1897, it was rebuilt as an H3 class steam locomotive. In 1913, it was sold to the J.T. Dwyer Quarry in Monocacy, Pennsylvania. In 1939, it was retired from service and was repurchased by the Pennsylvania Railroad. It was then restored to its 1888 appearance for display at the 1939-1940 New York World's Fair. After the fair, the locomotive was then stored inside the engine house at the East Trenton, New Jersey, Pennsylvania Railroad rail yard. Then it was added to the historic collection in Northumberland, Pennsylvania. Then, in 1969, it was on loan to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, and then 10 years later, it was donated to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania. Also, Pennsylvania Railroad 1187 is one of 3 surviving Pennsylvania Railroad 280s left in the world today, and 7688 and 2846 are the other ones, and all 3 of them are seen here on display at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where they are preserved today. About 1187 being on display, it is over a pit where you can go down into and see underneath the locomotive as well.
What you see right behind me is Camden and Amboy 1.
Camden and Amboy 1 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Juniata Shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania, 1940, and is a 420 Jervis type steam locomotive. Also, the locomotive is named John Bull. The replica tender was built in 1927 and the replica locomotive body was made in 1940. The original John Bull was built by the Robert Stephenson and Company in Darlington, England in 1831, and the original belongs to the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. The original was also built for the Camden and Amboy Railroad and was shipped to the country from England in parts, and Isaac Drips put the original together. This locomotive was actually built for the New York World's Fair, and it was a working replica. It also ran at the 1948-1949 Chicago Railroad Fair. This replica was actually used for reenactment scenes and films such as the Penzies Public Relations. It was also used for a 1946 Pennsylvania promotional film at the Chicago Railroad Fair. Then it was added to the collection at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania. Then, between 1983 and 1999, it ran under its own power. Today, it is on display here at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen today.
What you see right behind me is Camden and Amboy 3.
Camden and Amboy 3 was built by the Camden and Amboy Railroad Shops in Bordentown, Yorktown, New Jersey in 1836 and is a passenger coach. This is the coach that was pulled by the original John Bull locomotive. It also has four wheels and it features 24 bench seats and two rows just along the windows. This car and its sister accompanied the John Bull locomotive. In 1865, it was retired from service and it was purchased by a farmer who used the body as a chicken coop. Then it was acquired by the Pennsylvania Railroad for exhibition at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, Illinois. Also, it would be pulled by the replica John Bull that is currently placed behind. It also traveled the world fairs and expositions through the first half of the 20th century. Then, in 1960, it was donated to the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C., and is still owned by the museum. It was loaned to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen today.
What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 7006.
Pennsylvania Railroad 7006 was built by Electromotive Division in LaGrange, Illinois in 1955 and is the 20710th diesel locomotive built by that factory and is a GP9 type diesel locomotive. This locomotive spent several years pulling trains on the railroad it served. It was primarily a freight locomotive but pulled passenger trains if needed. Then, in 1968, the New York Central and Pennsylvania Railroad merged to form the Penn Central Railroad, and it likely kept that number when it worked that railroad. Then, in 1976, the railroad then merged to Conrail, and the locomotive still retained the number and continued service on the railroad. Then, in 1985, the locomotive was retired and it was donated to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania. It was repainted to its Pennsylvania Railroad livery in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 2002 and was then moved to the museum. Today, it is preserved here at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is preserved today. Also, you can even visit the locomotive's cab and sit where the engineer used to sit. And also, the cab is only open depending on whoever's available to open it as well.
What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 5901.
Pennsylvania Railroad 5901 was built by Electromotive Division in LaGrange, Illinois in 1945 and is the 3357th diesel locomotive built by that factory and is an E7A type diesel locomotive. This locomotive and its sister 5900 were the first two diesels to be built for passenger service on the Pennsylvania Railroad. The 5900 was the 3356th diesel locomotive built by the same factory and was built the same year. In 1968, it was renumbered 4200 for Penn Central. In 1972, that locomotive was cut up for scrap, but before then it worked with this locomotive for several years. The locomotive hauled passenger trains on the railroad many years ago. Then when the Pennsylvania Railroad and New York Central merged to become the Penn Central Railroad, it was renumbered 4201. Then in 1973, it was then retired and was nearly cut up for scrap. Then a quick thinking on part of railroad employees decided to save the locomotive. It's been hiding for a long time in an abandoned section of the Harrisburg Roundhouse. The Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission soon purchased it in 1976, and it was then moved to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen today. When it arrived, it was still in its Penn Central livery, and sometime later it was repainted to the Pennsylvania Railroad's Tuscan red livery sometime after the building was constructed. It was carefully restored to its Pennsylvania Railroad livery and number. Today, Pennsylvania Railroad 5901 is the only surviving E7A type diesel locomotive existing today, and can be found here at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen today.
What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 13182.
Pennsylvania Railroad 13182 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Junietta Shops in Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania in 1964, and is an ore hopper car. This car spent several years hauling iron ore by rail whenever it was used by the railroad. This car is also known as a Jenny. The smaller Jenny was cheaper to build and maintain, as well as lighter and more efficient to operate. Jennies were unloaded by rotating upside down in the rotary dumper. In winter, railroads needed to find solutions to deal with the tendency for ore to freeze inside the cars. They tried coating the exterior of the cars with foam to prevent freezing and inserting steam pipes into pockets to thaw frozen loads. Then, in 1968, the Pennsylvania Railroad and New York Central Railroad merged to form the Penn Central and was possibly used by that railroad. Then, in 1976, the railroad merged to Conrail and the car was possibly used by that railroad as well. Then in 1998, the car was then retired and it was then acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is preserved today.
What you see right behind me is Penn Central 32367.
Penn Central 32367 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Junietta Shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 1955 and is a covered hopper car. This car originally worked the Pennsylvania Railroad and it was originally numbered 257106. It spent many years hauling materials like bulk commodities of cement, sand, and other dry aggregates. Then, in 1968, the Pennsylvania Railroad and New York Central Railroad merged to form the Penn Central Railroad, and it was renumbered 32367. Also, the yellow letter S was marked by Penn Central because it was used by the company's department and was used to haul locomotive sand to terminals around the system. Then, in 1976, the railroad merged to Conrail and it was likely used by that railroad. In 1999, it was retired and was then acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is preserved today.
What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 19103.
Pennsylvania Railroad 19103 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Holiday Shops in Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania in 1960 and is a boxcar. This car spent many years hauling cargo that a boxcar like this one hauled many years ago, such as canned goods, boxes, and such. Then, in 1968, the Pennsylvania Railroad and New York Central merged to form the Penn Central Railroad, and it was likely used by that railroad. Then, in 1976, the railroad then merged to Conrail, and it was likely used by that railroad. Then, in 1995, it was retired from service and was then acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is preserved today.
What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad.
4465. Pennsylvania Railroad 4465 was built by General Electric in Schenectady, New York in 1963 and is the 340/11th electric locomotive built by that factory and is an E44 type electric locomotive. This unit was the last locomotive to be built for the Pennsylvania Railroad. It also spent many years hauling trains on the railroads it served as well. Also, these types of locomotives were nicknamed bricks because of their characteristic shapes. Originally, when it worked the Pennsylvania Railroad, it was a freight locomotive. Then, in 1968, the Pennsylvania Railroad and New York Central Railroad merged to form the Penn Central Railroad, and the locomotive kept the number and was then put into passenger service. Then the Penn Central merged to Conrail in 1976, and again the locomotive kept the number. Then the locomotive was used by the New Jersey Transit starting in 1983. Then it was acquired by Amtrak and it was renumbered 502 starting in 1986. Amtrak was then planning on using it for maintenance of way use on the Northeast Corridor, but was then retired because of age and concerns about the PCBs used in their transformers. Also, it was never used to pull a train when it was in ownership with Amtrak. In 1991, it was then retired and was then donated to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania by Amtrak, and it was repainted to how it originally looked. Also, it is the only remaining E44 left in the world today and can be seen here on display at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen today. Also, you can visit the locomotive's cab and sit where the engineer used to sit, but the cab is only open depending on the availability of whoever's willing to open the cab as well.
What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 4935.
Pennsylvania Railroad 4935 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Juniata Shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 1942 and is the 4434th electric locomotive built by that factory. and is a GG1 type electric locomotive. It is one of 139 GG1s built. It was used for hauling passenger trains for many years. Then, in 1968, when the Pennsylvania Railroad and New York Central Railroad merged to form the Penn Central, the locomotive kept the number. Then, about 1971, it was sold to Amtrak but kept the number. In 1977, it pulled the last run of an RPO car. Then, in 1980, it was retired, and in 1981, it was donated to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania by the Friends of the GG1 Committee member Russell Wilcox. He is also a retired employee of the Pennsylvania Railroad. And at some point in time, it was repainted to its Penn Central livery. And when it arrived, it was still how it was in its Penn Central livery. And then later, it was then repainted to its Pennsylvania Railroad scheme, but in the Brunswick green livery the railroad used sometime after the building was constructed. In 2008, it was towed to Washington, D.C. Union Station for the celebration of the station's 100th anniversary. Then, after the event, it returned back home to the museum. Also, Pennsylvania Railroad 4935 is one of 16 surviving GG1s left in the world today, and 4935 can be found here at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, along with 4800 where they are preserved today. Also on 4935, you can also ring the locomotive's bell.
And that's how it's done. What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 9356.
Pennsylvania Railroad 9356 was built by the St. Louis Car Company in St. Louis, Missouri in 1928 and is a B60B class baggage car. This car was used for many years to carry passengers' baggage on board as well, while it was used on the Pennsylvania Railroad. Then, when the Pennsylvania Railroad and New York Central Railroad both merged to form the Penn Central in 1968, it was likely used by that railroad. It also may have found itself in maintenance of way service on the railroad as well. Then, in 1985, it was then retired from service and was then acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it can be seen today.
What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 1651.
Pennsylvania Railroad 1651 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Juniata Shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 1906 and is a P-58 class passenger coach. For many years, this car was used on passenger trains on the Pennsylvania Railroad and also would be used for carrying passengers on board as well. Although the car was prompted by the enormous safety hazards of coal-burning steam locomotives using the new Hudson River tunnels, the Pennsylvania Railroad developed the first prototype of its new steel passenger cars. This car proved unsatisfactory as a genuinely fireproof car because of the amount of combustible material still present. As a result of this dissatisfaction, it was the only one of its kind ever built, although it paved the way for a new production model. In 1930, the car was then retired from service. Later, it was acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania, where it is seen on display today.
What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 1006.
Pennsylvania Railroad 1006 was built by Standard Steel Car Company in 1928 and is a P-70R passenger coach. Originally, it was numbered 3433. For many years, it was used on passenger trains and also would be used for carrying passengers on board as well, whenever it was used on the Pennsylvania Railroad. Then it was renumbered 1006. In 1967, it was then retired from service and was then acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen on display today.
What you see right behind me is the Pullman Lottos Club.
The Pullman Lottos Club was built by Pullman in 1913 and is a lounge observation car. For many years, this car was seen on passenger trains. The name Lottos Club comes from what is known as a fashionable men's literary club in New York City. It features a sleeping section and a lounge as the accommodations of railroad travel in the heyday. It is believed to have been originally been built for service on the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad's California Limited passenger train, and it was originally named El Quivira. Also, it was built with 10 sections and an observation lounge, and both were done in 1936. It was later given the present name, and the car was reconfigured with 8 sections, a lounge, buffet, and solarium. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, high costs prohibited the railroads from operating full-size dining and lounge cars to meet changing customer demands without building new cars. Pullman modified several older cars into combined restaurant sleepers. 2 of the sleeping sections were removed and a kitchen and dining area was added, while the open platforms were enclosed and air conditioning installed. After the modifications, the car was renamed Lotto's Club. In 1967, the car made one last trip from Chicago, Illinois to South Bend, Indiana to the Notre Dame game in 1967. It was privately leased for the excursion and hosted the family and friends by Elmer Layden, one of the famed four horsemen of Notre Dame. Also, this was the last car of its type in Pullman Company service. Later that year, the car was retired from service and was purchased by Peter Tilp, who was a Pullman enthusiast and memorabilia collector who had the car moved to a section of track alongside a factory owned by his family in Union, New Jersey. Then, in 1981, Peter then donated the car to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is preserved today.
What you see right behind me is Lehigh Valley 2606.
Lehigh Valley 2606 was built by the Lehigh Valley Railroad Shops in Packerton, Pennsylvania in 1890 and is a four-wheel bobber caboose. It saw service on the back of freight trains for several years and acted as the train crew's office. In 1937, it was retired from service and it was removed from its wheels and became a watchman's shanty. Then it became a storage shed and then a playhouse for kids known as Aunt Clara's Caboose. Then it was later acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, and it was carefully restored. Today it is on display here at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen on display today.
What you see right behind me is the
Cowder Sport.
and Port Allegheny Railroad snowplow.
The Cowder Sport and Port Allegheny snowplow was built by the Russell Snowplow Company in Ridgeway, Pennsylvania in 1897 and is a wedged snowplow. The original number to this car is unknown. It spent many years clearing snow off the tracks during snowy days, depending on how big the blankets of snow were. It would also be pushed by a locomotive to clear the snow off the tracks as well. In 1945, the car was then retired and was in storage for years. Then, in 1980, it was donated to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania by the Wellsville, Addison, and Gailton Railroad, where it is seen on display today.
What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 2846.
Pennsylvania Railroad 2846 was built by Baldwin in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1905 and is the 267/44th steam locomotive built by that factory and is an H6SB class steam locomotive. It was used to haul freight trains on the railroad several years ago. Starting in 1913, it was the first Pennsylvania Railroad locomotive to be fitted with superheaters to further dry steam on its path between the boiler and the pistons. It had other modifications added, which included the addition of power reverse lever, a pipe from the steam dome to the pilot wheels on the fireman side of the locomotive was also a relatively rare addition. It was used in winter to discharge steam over frozen points. In 1956, it was retired and it was added to the historic collection in Northumberland, Pennsylvania. Then, in 1969, it was loaned to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, and then 10 years later, it was donated to the museum where it can be seen today. Also, Pennsylvania Railroad 2846 is one of 3 surviving Pennsylvania Railroad 280s left in the world today, and 7688 and 1187 are the other ones, and all 3 of them are seen here on display at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where they are preserved today. About 2846, you can also step onto the footplate and view the locomotive's cab as well. But most of the time, the barricade between the footplate and the cab is usually up, but depending on the availability of volunteers, the cab is open and you can sit where the engineer and fireman used to sit. And also, if you're wondering why the smoke box door is open unexpectedly, it's because they mostly have it open for people to see the inside of the smoke box to learn what it looks like on the inside as well.
What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 33164.
Pennsylvania Railroad 33164 was built by the Scohen Pressed Steel Company in McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania in 1898 and is a hopper car. This car spent many years hauling cargo such as coal on the railroad whenever it was in service. It even found itself on a line of hopper cars that may look identical to it. In 1939, the car was then retired and it was then acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is preserved today. Also, it is the oldest surviving steel freight car in existence today and is preserved here at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is on display today.
What you see right behind me is Delaware and Hudson 19607.
Delaware and Hudson 19607 was built by American Car and Foundry in Berwick, Pennsylvania in 1907 and is a boxcar. It's been many years hauling cargo that a boxcar would haul for many years, such as boxes, crates, and materials that were shipped on board this car many years ago. It was then put into maintenance of way service and was a tool car on the railroad. Then in 1970 the car was then retired and it was then acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen on display today. And also, you can even visit the interior of the car as well.
What you see right behind me is Fruit Growers Express 57708.
Fruit Growers Express 55708 was built by the Fruit Growers Express in Alexandria, Virginia, 1924 and is a wooden refrigerator car. This car was once used on the Fruit Growers Express train many years ago, and it appears it was used on a line of refrigerator cars that look alike to it, and it would also carry what refrigerator cars would carry, like fruit on board or whatever else it might have hauled in the past. Then later on it was retired and then it was used as a storage unit for materials. Then it was acquired by the Cooperstown and Marne Railroad for preservation. Then in 1922 it was acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen today.
What you see right behind me is
Wymanola
Sugar 3.
Wyanola Sugar Company 3 was built by Baldwin in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1883 and is the 6753rd steam locomotive built by that factory and is an 042T tank engine type steam locomotive. Also, the locomotive is named Olomana. It was originally named Paali. It was also built to run on a 3-foot gauge railroad and was used to pull sugar cane trains in the state of Hawaii many years ago. Then in 1910 it was given the current name. Then in 1944 it was retired. It then sat abandoned at the refinery. Then in 1948 it was purchased by Jerry Best as well as Disney animator Ward Kimball, and it was shipped to San Gabriel, California. Ward Kimball then restored the locomotive to operation on his private railroad. Originally, it was an oil burner between 1952 and 1953. The locomotive was converted to burn wood. There were occasions where Walt Disney, who was Ward Kimball's boss, operated the locomotive on his railroad. In 1977, Jerry and Ward donated the locomotive to the Smithsonian Institute of the Museum of American history in Washington, D.C., and was on display there. In 1999, it was loaned to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, in what was supposed to have been a temporary arrangement before it was moved to a permanent location near Allentown, Pennsylvania. Today, it is presently on display at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen today.
What you see right behind me is American Car and Foundry 4546.
American Car and Foundry 4556 was built by American Car and Foundry in St. Charles, Missouri in 1939 and is a tanker car. This car was used for many years and used on freight trains hauling some different kinds of liquids it may have hauled many years ago as well. It was even used on mixed freight trains years ago, or may have been used on a line of tankers just like it. Then, later on, it was retired, and in the 1970s, it was acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is preserved today.
What you see right behind me is Pittsburgh and Lake Erie 508.
Pittsburgh and Lake Erie 508 was built by the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie Railroad Shops in McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania in 1950 and is a bay window caboose. This caboose was used by the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie Railroad for several years, and it was seen on the back of freight trains many years ago, and it served as the train crew's office as well. Then in 1991, it was then retired from service, and then Earl Kinnard bought the caboose, and he soon donated it to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen today. In 2021, it was moved into the restoration shop, and it had a repaint till about 2022, and it was soon looking good as new. Today, it can be found here on display at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen on display today.
What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 492 445.
Pennsylvania Railroad 492 445 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Junietta Shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 1910 and is a BM70M RPO car. It was originally numbered 6517. This car was used for many years on the railroad and was once used for many years and was used in passenger service on the railroad and used for sorting mail on board as well. Then it was rebuilt as an instruction car in 1928. It was then renumbered 492 445. It was used to train crew members on how brakes worked. On one occasion, it had the ability to simulate a freight train of 50 cars in length. Then, in 1966, it was retired from service and it was then acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen on display today. And also you can visit the interior of the car as well.
Well, I hope you.
What you see right behind me is Lehigh Valley 40. Lehigh Valley 40 was built by the Budd Company in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1951 and is the 5410th diesel rail car built by that factory and is an RDC-1 type diesel rail car. It was used by the Lehigh Valley Railroad and this is the number it carried. For many years, it was used for hauling passengers on board as well. Then, in 1962, it was sold to the Reading Railroad and it was renumbered 9163. After the Reading Railroad merged to Conrail, the car was then acquired by the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transit Authority and it kept the number. Then in 1981, it was retired, and in 1984, it was then donated to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is preserved today. What you see right behind me is Baldwin 1200. Baldwin 1200 was built by Baldwin in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1952 and is the 75709th diesel locomotive built by that factory and is a Baldwin S12 type diesel locomotive. It was one of the first two demonstrator units to be built by Baldwin, and the second one was the 1201. This locomotive was then sold to the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad along with its sister, and this one was renumbered 758 and the other being 759. They both worked together at the railroad yard switching cars in Blue Island, Illinois, and they were the only two of their type to operate on the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad. Then this locomotive was sold to the United States Navy in 1959, where it was renumbered 65 00369. Then the 759 was retired in 1966 and was likely scrapped that time. This locomotive was retired, and in 1992 it was donated to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania by the United States Navy Ordnance Depot in Earl, New Jersey, and was soon repainted to its Baldwin livery number. Today, this locomotive is seen on display at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is preserved today. What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 500,001. Pennsylvania Railroad 500,001 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Shops in Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania, 1966, and is a tanker car. This car is also known as the Rail Whale, hence the size of this car. It is one of two that were built, and car 500,000 was scrapped later on. This car could carry 38,000 gallons inside the tank. Then, in 1968, the Pennsylvania Railroad and New York Central merged to form the Penn Central Railroad, and the car was then renumbered 79900. Then, in 1976, the Penn Central then merged to Conrail, where the car would be renumbered 70899. Then it would go to the Norfolk Southern Railroad. Then in 1995, it was then retired, and then in 1997, it was displayed in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Then afterwards, it would then be acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen on display today. What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 4800. Pennsylvania Railroad 4800 was built by General Electric in Schenectady, New York in 1934 and is the 11646th electric locomotive built by that factory and is a GG1 type electric locomotive. It is one of 139 GG1s built. This is also the first GG1 built. It is the only GG1 that was built with a riveted body, hence the nickname of the locomotive is Old Rivets. Also, it was used for hauling passenger trains for many years. It was originally numbered 4899. Then it was renumbered 4800. Then in 1968, when the Pennsylvania Railroad and New York Central Railroad merged to become the Penn Central, the locomotive kept the number. Then in 1976, the railroad merged to Conrail but still kept the number. It was the only GG1 to wear the Conrail blue and was the only GG1 to wear the Conrail bicentennial paint scheme to celebrate 200 years of the USA. Later, it was retired, and in 1980, it was acquired by the Lancaster chapter of the National Railroad Historical Society in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Then in 2000, it was acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen today. Also, Pennsylvania Railroad 4800 is one of 16 surviving GG1s left in the world today, and 4800 can be found here at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, along with Unit 4935 as well. And today, it can be found here at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania, where it is today. What you see right behind me is Amtrak 915. Amtrak 915 was built by Electromotive Division in LaGrange, Illinois in 1979 and is the 776-073-16th electric locomotive built by that factory and is an AEM 7 type electric locomotive. For many years, it hauled Amtrak passenger trains on the Northeast Corridor between Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C., and ran at speed about 125 miles per hour on the tracks. These locomotives are also nicknamed meatballs by rail fans because these locomotives were designed in Sweden and the AEM 7s were built in the United States, which is why they'd be known as Swedish meatballs. Then in 2015, it was retired and was donated to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen today. What you see right behind me is Reading 1. Reading 1 was built by the Budd Company in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1937 and is an observation car. This car saw service on the Reading Crusader passenger train for many years. It was used on the back end of the passenger trains it rolled on for many years. Then in 1967, it was sold to the Canadian National Railroad, where it was renumbered 304. Also, the interior was renovated and a snack bar was installed. It also operated on the Lake Champlain until the early 1980s. Then, in 1982, the car was then retired from service, and then in 1983, it was bought by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, and was restored to how it looked when it was used by the Reading Railroad. Today, it is preserved here at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen on display today. What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 3936, 3937. Pennsylvania Railroad 3936, 3937 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Juniata shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 1911 and is the 2244th electric locomotive built by that factory and is a DD1 type electric locomotive. This unit is a married pair and it means they are permanently hooked together. The first two units were tested in 1909 and 25 were subsequently ordered that year for delivery in 1910. This pair was used to work in tunnels under the Hudson River between New Jersey and New York City, taking power from a 600-volt DC third rail rather than an overhead catenary. The units operated between Manhattan Transfer and Pennsylvania Station, and from there to the Pennsylvania Railroad's coach yards at Sunnyside Yard in Queens, New York. The units of this kind ceased operating on mainline passenger service in 1924 when Pennsylvania Railroad's 13 L5 units appeared. However, they still hauled empty passenger trains from Penn Station to the Sunnyside Yard, and their simplicity and reliability meant that they actually outlasted the L5 units by some years. In 1967, 3936 was renumbered 4780 and 3937 was renumbered 4781. In 1968, it was then retired from service when the Pennsylvania Railroad and New York Central Railroad merged to form the Penn Central Railroad. In 1979, the Penn Central donated the unit to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, and it was restored to how the railroad built it originally. Today, this is the only remaining DD1 left in the world today, and it is preserved here at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania where it is seen today. What you see right behind me is Virginia and Truckee 20. Virginia and Truckee 20 was built by Baldwin in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1875 and is the 3687th steam locomotive built by that factory and is a 260 mogul type steam locomotive. Also, the locomotive is named Tahoe. The factory that built the locomotive was originally known as M. Baird and Company around that time it was built. The locomotive was used in freight service and passenger service on the line for many years. It worked the Virginia and Truckee Railroad in the state of Nevada originally. It originally burnt wood. In 1907, it was converted from burning wood to coal. In 1911, it was then converted to burn oil. Over the years, the locomotive had several different modifications. In 1926, it was put in storage in Carson City, Nevada. In 1942, the locomotive was sold to Clifford C. Bond Construction in Arcadia, California, and it helped build several railroad classification yards for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. After the war, it was stored in Bong's Yard in Arcadia, California. In 1968, the locomotive was then bought by the Pennsylvania Railroad Historical and Museum Commission for preservation, and it then went on display at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania, where it is seen today. It was shipped to Strasburg, Pennsylvania on a flat car, and during that time, it was painted black in most areas, and the smokestack was different compared to the one it has. It was soon cosmetically restored to its 1875 look. Today, it is on display in this spot at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen today. Also, Virginia and Truckee 20 is one of 3 Virginia and Truckee 260s still around, but there are only 2 originals that remain, and 13 is located at the California State Railroad Museum in Sacramento, California, and it is named Empire. And 20 can be found here at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is today. What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 5690. Pennsylvania Railroad 5690 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Juniata Shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 1934 and is the 4263rd electric locomotive built by that factory and is a B1 type electric locomotive. This was the last of its kind to be built. This is the original number it had. It's been many years switching cars around in New York City. Then, in 1967, it was renumbered 4756. In 1968, the Pennsylvania Railroad and New York Central merged to form the Penn Central Railroad, and it kept the number. Then, in 1971, it was retired, and it was then bought by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, and it was restored to its original glory. Also, it is the only remaining B1 electric locomotive left in the world today and is preserved here at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen on display today. What you see right behind me is Western Maryland 203. Western Maryland 203 was built by Pullman in 1914 and is a business car. This car spent many years hauling railroad executives on board for several years, and it was seen rolling on the back of passenger trains many years ago. Carl Gray, who was president of the railroad from 1867 to 1939, used this car for many years. It had other executives on board as well. It had accommodations for up to 4 executives with a dining room, kitchen, pantry, crew quarters, lounge, and 2 master bedrooms, and both had a shower. In 1954, Dorothy Draper, who was a decorator of hotel and automobile interiors, remodeled the car. Then in the 1960s, it was retired and it was then acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is preserved today. What you see right behind me is Letonia Railway 1. Letonia Railway 1 was built by the Lima Locomotive Works in Lima, Ohio in 1906 and is the 1799 steam locomotive built by that factory and is a 3-truck shay type steam locomotive and is a 65-3 class steam locomotive. This locomotive was never used by the Letonia Railway. Originally, it was built to work the Enterprise Lumber Company in Sims, Louisiana, and was originally numbered 4. For many years, the locomotive was used to haul timber products during its service life in the logging industry. In 1913, it was sold to the Cherry River, Bloom, and Lumber Company in Jerryville, West Virginia, and was renumbered 16. Then, in 1952, it was then sold to F.C. Cook Company in Alexandria, West Virginia, and kept the number. It was then leased to the Beech Mountain Railroad in Alexandria, West Virginia, starting in 1953, and it still kept the number. Then, in 1954, the lease ended and it was returned as Cook Natwick Company in Alexandria, West Virginia, and it still kept the number. Then it was sold to Eli Thomas Lumber Company in Fenwick, Pennsylvania, and was renumbered to in 1956. In 1964, it was retired, and in 1966, it was acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, and was renumbered 1 and lettered Letonia Railway. But like I said, that railroad never owned this locomotive, though. Today, it is preserved here at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen on display today. What you see right behind me is W.H. Mason Lumber Company 4. W.H. Mason Lumber 4 was built by Climax Locomotive Works in Corey, Pennsylvania in 1913 and is the 1237th steam locomotive built by that factory and is a two-truck Climax type steam locomotive and is a B-class steam locomotive. For many years, this locomotive was used to haul timber for the companies it was used for. It was built originally for the Moore Keppel and Company in Elmore, West Virginia, and used this number for that company, and it always had this number. Then in 1930, it was transferred to the Middle Fork Railroad in Elmore, West Virginia. Then in 1948, it was sold to the W.H. Mason Lumber Company in Elkins, West Virginia. In 1956, it was then retired from service and was then sold to Edaville Corp in South Palmer, Massachusetts, where it operated till operations were ceased. Then in 1992, it was purchased by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen on display today. What you see right behind me is W.T. Smith Lumber Company 4. W.T. Smith Lumber Company 4 was built by Heisler Locomotive Works in Erie, Pennsylvania in 1918 and is the 1375th steam locomotive built by that factory and is a two-truck Heisler type steam locomotive and is a 53-8-38 class steam locomotive. It was used to haul lumber products for the companies it was used by for many years. It first worked the W.T. Smith Lumber Company in Chapman, Alabama, and was originally numbered 10. It was never numbered 4 during its service life. Then it was later sold to the Angelina Hardwood Lumber Company in Faraday, Louisiana, and was renumbered 6. Then it was later sold to the Chicago Mill and Lumber Company in Tallulah, Louisiana, and it was renumbered 5. In 1965, the locomotive was retired from service and it was then bought by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen on display today. What you see right behind me is the Vulcan Ironworks diesel. The Vulcan Ironworks diesel was built by the Vulcan Ironworks in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania in 1930 and is the 4067th diesel locomotive built by that factory and is an 80-ton gasoline switcher type diesel locomotive. It was originally used at the Vulcan Ironworks where it was built and was used as a shop switcher for the factory. Then it was used at the Abe and Solomon Incorporated. Then it was used by the Dashore Car Company. Then in the 1960s, it was retired from service, and in 1973, it was purchased by Harold Cox, who moved it to Dashore, Pennsylvania, and Ed donated the unit to the Electric City Trolley Museum in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and it was used to switch trolley cars in places where there were no overhead wires. Then in 2006, it was then donated to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen on display today. What you see right behind me is Pennsylvania Railroad 5403. Pennsylvania Railroad 5403 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Juniata Shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 1892 and is a baggage RPO car. This car was used for a number of years on the railroad and was once used for many years and was used in passenger service on the railroad and used for sorting mail on board when it was used on trains as well. Another section of the car was where passengers' baggage would be kept on board as well. In 1939, it was then retired from service. Later, it was then acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is preserved today. What you see right behind me is Conrail 2233. Conrail 2233 was built by Electromotive Division in LaGrange, Illinois in 1963 and is the 28141st diesel locomotive built by that factory and is a GP30 type diesel locomotive. Originally, this locomotive was built for the Pennsylvania Railroad and it always carried this number. It was used to pull freight trains on the railroads it served for many years. Then, in 1968, when the Pennsylvania Railroad and New York Central merged to become the Penn Central, it was used by that railroad. Then the Penn Central merged to Conrail in 1976, and the locomotive was used by that railroad. Then it was retired, and in 1984, it was restored to its Pennsylvania Railroad livery. Then, in 1998, it was donated to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, and it was repainted in its Conrail livery as it is today. Also, it can be seen on display here, and also you can visit the locomotive's cab and sit where the engineer used to sit as well. What you see right behind me is Lehigh Valley 750-073. Lehigh Valley 750-73 was built by the Lehigh Valley Railroad Shops in Sayre, Pennsylvania in 1935 and is a boxcar. It spent many years hauling cargo that a boxcar would haul for many years, such as boxes, crates, and materials that were shipped on board this car many years ago. Then, in 1970, the car was then retired and it was then acquired by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it is seen on display today. Well, I hope y'all enjoyed learning about trains with me today in Matthew Lap Train Guy. Also, I hope to see y'all again real soon, and if you didn't subscribe to my channel yet, the subscribe button is just down below the video screen, and if you didn't give the Facebook page a like yet, here's where you'll want to go. If you didn't give the Instagram page a follow yet, here's where you'll want to go as well. Also, be sure to get your merch at teesprings.com. The link is in the description box below, along with the Facebook and Instagram pages. And as always, remember to subscribe to the Train Guy. So this is Matthew Lapp, host of Matthew Lapp Train Guy, signing out. Till next time, all aboard!